Welcome to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast, a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. I put a new Excel sheet on the Rockstar Residency Interview Prep and Support course. This is one of the free resources. It's easier to look here. So 2020-2021 Residency Interview Free Resources, 15 Interviews Worksheet, and I'll explain what that is, but it's just what it sounds like. Someone I'm working with got 15 interviews, and what do you do with something like that? And it's kind of an extreme of what some of you are dealing with, which is, I didn't expect to get this many interviews. Now what do I do? And last year I talked to someone who had gotten 8 or 9 interviews, and they talked about how they kind of made it into a fun road trip. But let me talk a little bit about why you get people with a lot of interviews like that, and what the conventional wisdom is and how that conventional wisdom is wrong. So the 80-20 rule is Pareto's principle, which says that, for example, in Italy, it was 20% of the people had 80% of the wealth. So in some fraction, and it's not going to be 80-20 in pharmacy residency because of the number of spots, but in some fraction, 20% of 80% of the interview invitations are going to go to 20% of the people. So the top 20 are going to get more in some way than another. And I'll show you a little math that I do with that. So we'll say there's 4,000 spots, which is about right. And then we'll say that they're going to take about 4 interviewees per spot. And the actual number is between 4 and 8. So 4, 6, or 8. I could have done any of those. And we'll say there's 16,000 total interviews out there. What a lot of advisors tell you is that, well, if you just apply to 10 places, then you get 3 or 4 interviews. And then you interview with them, and then you just kind of rank your top 3 and maybe cut one off. Well, that's not how it works at all. When you have 16,000 interviews and 6,400 interviewees, we say we have 2.5 interviews per interviewee. And that is not how it works, because we see people with 8 interviews, 9 interviews, 15 interviews, 7 out of 7, 8 out of 8, 9 out of 9. And this model doesn't really account for that, because those aren't really outliers. It's really a bimodal distribution. And let me show you how this works out. Instead of using 80-20, what I'm going to say is, of those 16,000 interviews, half of those interviews went to Pool A, and half of those interviews went to Pool B. Pool A is 20% of that group. So here we are. Here we are with Pool A, 1,600 of the 8,000, not the no interview 8,000, but the top of that 8,000. And Pool B is 6,400, or the rest of the 80% of that 8,000. Residency sites are, of course, going to give interviews to the top applicants, but the top applicants stop at a certain point, and it doesn't stop at the middle. It stops at the top. So we're going to say 1,600 got 8,000 interviews. That's about 5 interviews per person. Or you've got Pool B. 6,400 got 8,000 interviews. And you say, well, what about the people that didn't get one? Well, good, take those out. So now it's 4,800 got those 8,000 interviews, and that puts us squarely a little more towards 2, but somewhere between 1 and 2 interviews per person in here. So you're either a multi-interview Pool A, where you've probably got 5, 6, 10 interviews, or you're a single or maybe 2 interview Pool B. And what separates these? What is it that happened there? Number one, first, this was in control of the applicant. They might have applied to all academic medical center and top sites. It's like applying to all 8 schools in the Ivy League and having 2 safety schools. Well, your chances aren't to get the 2.5 interviews. I'll at least get one of the Ivies. Your chances are that none of the Ivies are probably going to take you, and your 2 safety schools are. So that's one strategy. Second is the toxic recommendation. One of the recommenders really didn't like you, and you might have thought that, oh, they're going to give me an okay recommendation, or an okay recommendation is there. Or worse, you had to use someone you didn't want to because of the limit, because of COVID, of the number of APPEs that were available. Generic LOI, that's another reason that will shave down the number of interviews that you get. And then a mismatched CV. you're applying to an acute care hospital, but your experience is all community, including your APPEs, or you don't have any hospital work experience and you're applying to a top hospital or something like that. So this is the reason you end up in Pool B. Also, I guess, pharmacy school in the bottom 50. So if you're a pharmacy school in the bottom 50, you could end up in Pool B, and a lot of reasons like that. So there's still going to be people getting one or two, but these are kind of the top 5 reasons you're going to have that interview issue. Okay. So we've got these interviews, and what I want to show you is what happened and what you can fix about it, especially as it comes to phase 2. When you look at the top reasons that someone applied to a site, number 1 is always geographic location. Number 2 is perceived goodness of fit. And that's going to change when you have your interview. My brother says, when you meet somebody online and then you meet them in person, it's like meeting them for the first time all over again. Reputation geographic location went from 1st to 3rd when actually ranking. Reputation went from 3rd to 5th. Academic Medical Center didn't even make it on the rankings when it came to the average student and ranking. And then quality of residence, though it's really quantity of residence. You've got one resident site versus multiple resident sites. But quality of residence, how can you even do that beforehand versus quality of residence here in 4th position. So that's the only one that moved up because you were actually meeting them. Something that was kind of a surprise is that staffing and pay were not there. But if you think about it, one, if you wouldn't say that staffing is an issue because you don't want to seem weak, and pay isn't an issue because you don't want to seem like you're greedy. And then what's really important in ranking is the RPD. Nothing is going to be more important than your happiness in a job than your immediate supervisor. So the RPD, I think maybe RPD fits in goodness of fit. Like, I get along with the RPD, we fit. So maybe that's why that isn't. But I would put RPD as the most important thing, because if that's a mismatch, that's going to make for a tough year. And then staffing and pay. I mean, if you've got equal sites and you've got these 15 sites interviews, I'm not going to work 12-2. I'm not going to work 12. Every other weekend sounds like, oh, it's just every other weekend. But it's not every other weekend. It's every single day for 12 days, 2 days off. Every single day for 12 days, 2 days off. How are you going to be an effective person if you are not in a healthy work environment where you have work-life balance? And then the pay, why would you take less money if you've got 2 equal sites? The residency application, so what I did with the Excel sheet is you can kind of put these numbers in there and put, now honestly kind of looking back what you thought about these, and there's some of them are going to change. And then you can also put the residency ranking and have an objective measure of, okay, well, this is what the numbers show me. I guess I could have opened that up a little bit more. Okay. But what I want to show you is that when you come to ranking, and we'll talk about this later in the season, this is a subjective thing, goodness of fit. Interview day experience, that's subjective. Geographic location, that's objective. Quality of residence, that's subjective. Reputation, I still think it's subjective because reputation to you, and no one cares about the reputation. Like, okay, great. I'm at a site with a great reputation and I'm miserable. Like, why would you want that? But I understand why that ended up 5th. So as you're looking forward, as you're kind of trying to figure out what do I do with all these interviews, know that you are going from the objective, which you tried to do in the application process, and then you're moving way over to the subjective. And if you feel that your intuition says a certain site is first, go with your intuition. It's going to be annoying, it's going to be cliche, but go with your gut. That really, really is what other people are feeling. So they're making decisions and they're ranking people and they're putting numbers out, and I know that there's a point system. But honestly, when it comes down to it, when you figure out the numbers and all of that, ultimate decision, go with your gut. But again, I've got this on the residency interview prep course. You can just access it as a free preview. But please do take the time to do this so that you know where to put each residency.